Good morning, everyone. This is Jill Florent from the QuickSight Product Management team. And I'd like to welcome you to our Cost Intelligence Dashboard workshop. Today, we're going to be focusing in on using QuickSight to create a dashboard that gives you insights into your AWS cost and usage reports. This is part of a weekly immersive learning series that's going on throughout the fall. And I just wanted to call out that we have sessions like this one on different topics led by our AWS solutions architects with this, hands-on immersive learning experience going on weekly through November 18th, on kind of circulating through 4 different topics. All sessions, including today's, are going to be recorded and then shared via email with registered attendees within the next day or 2 after the workshop. And we also will be putting the recording into the QuickSight YouTube channel. So great place for you to access materials after the fact. In a moment, I'm going to be turning it over to Ali Whitman from our AWS Optics team. And we're going to be using throughout today both the chat and our Q&A. So just pointing out that in the GoToWebinar panel that you see on the right side, there will be a place for questions and also a chat. So I'll share the resource in just a moment that we're going to be following kind of step-by-step through. And we're going to be very interested in helping get your questions answered today. Thank you for joining us live. And without further ado, let me just turn it over to Ali Whitman.
Thanks, Jill. So, hi everyone, my name is Ali Whitman, and I'm a commercial architect at Amazon Web Services. I work on a team called Optics, and we act as subject matter experts in helping you optimize your current and future cloud spend. Today's format is going to be to help you set up the cost intelligence dashboard. And it's going to start with a brief overview, followed by a video demo of setting up the dashboard that you can follow along with. And then for the remainder and majority of the call, a Q&A to answer any of your questions, as well as go over any key points with the lab. The Cost Intelligence Dashboard is an interactive, customizable, and accessible QuickSight dashboard to help create the foundation for your own cost management and optimization reporting tools. This came out of working with a bunch of customers across all of AWS, as well as my experience as a customer. We're really excited for you guys to get to leverage this, customize it, and make it your own. And so some of the outcomes for today's lab are going to be to create that customizable interactive dashboard that you can then take and overlay to make it exactly what you need to see and what your teams need to see. Overlaying it with either your business units or segments. We see teams doing this with their organizations data or using a mapping table. Providing yourself cost transparency in the cost values that you need to see. And finally, breaking down your cost into how your teams need to see it so that they can better leverage the cloud and run efficiently. Let's start the lab.
This video demos setting up the Cost Intelligence Dashboard using the steps listed in the well-architected lab. To get started, you first want to navigate to the well-architected lab and review the prerequisites. It's important to make sure that you have completed all of the prerequisites prior to starting the lab. These ensure that you are able to complete the lab start to finish. Now that you've confirmed that you're ready to get started, let's continue with the lab. You'll see on the left-hand side I have the console, and the right-hand side I have the steps. The first thing you want to do is request access to the template. You can request access to just the Cost Intelligence Dashboard or all of the different templates. I'm going to request access to all of the templates. Now that I've been successfully granted access to the templates, I'm ready to move on to the next part of the lab. The next part of the lab is working with getting the views set up in Athena. These will form the foundation of your dashboard. Before getting started, you first need to figure out if you have savings plans and reserved instances. If you know of this ahead of time, you can skip this step. I like to complete it just to make sure that I know that I have them. What I'm going to do is copy over the queries and change the database and table name to point at my database and table name. You can see them right on the left-hand side. I'm running the savings plan right now and it will show me if I have savings plan by coming back with results. Since this came back with results, I know I have savings plans. I'm going to do the same thing for the reserved instances to validate if I have reserved instances. You'll use the knowledge that you get from understanding if you have savings plans or reserved instances to identify what view you'll need to use. We have views for all of the different options. So I have reserved instances and savings plans. I'm making note of that because I'll need it for setting up all of my views. We're now going to set up the 5 Athena views, starting with the summary view. You'll see the 4 different options there, and I'm going to select the one with reserved instances and savings plans. I'm again copying it over and pasting it into Athena. I'm making sure to change the table name following the directions in the lab. Now I've successfully created my first view. I'm going to run the check to make sure that it is created. So it's taking a little bit of time to run, but what you can see now is that it's successfully created and previewed successfully. We're now ready to move on to the second view. We're going to follow the same exact steps of using the same option that you have based on your reserved instances and savings plans and paste it over into Athena and update your table and run the query to create your second view. This view also successfully created. Now I'm going to show you a different way to check to make sure that the view is created. Rather than having to copy over the query, you can select the 3 dots next to the view and select Preview. What you'll see is this automatically runs it for you, and I find it to be a little bit easier. We're now moving on to the third view. It gets a little bit repetitive, but we're going to walk through each of the different steps today. We're now making that third view, which is your Compute Savings Plan Eligible Spend view, following the same steps as before. So I've updated my table name, and now I've successfully created this view. Again, I'm going to make sure that it's successfully created and preview it. We're now moving on to our fourth view and are going to follow the same steps again. Reminder to always select the right views based on your reserved instances and savings plans and update your views if you purchase reserved instances or savings plans. So I've created that fourth view successfully and again previewing it. I have one more view left, and this view is the reserved instances and savings plan mapping. What you'll notice about this view that's a unique view is that there's 2 different table names where I need to add my table name. That's because we're joining data here. So make sure you're updating both of the table names using the instructions in the lab. I've successfully created my last view, and now I can move over into QuickSight. Now, once I'm in QuickSight, I'm going to take these views and create data sets from them. The first thing I'm doing is creating a new data set, and my data source is going to be Athena. So I'm going to name this, I'm going to actually name this Cost Dashboard to align with the lab. So now that I've created my data source, I now need to select my database. Again, you saw this at the top of Athena, so if you're not sure, you can always go back to Athena to confirm what it is. Mine is cur_sample. So I'm going to select the first view, which is that summary view, and click Edit and Preview Data. The first thing I want to do is up in the query mode, I'm going to select Spice. Now I need to update my payer account ID to change it to be an integer, as well as my linked account ID to change it to be an integer. This allows me to not have to worry about leading zeros in any of my mapping tables and having any issues. So now that I've done this, I'm going to save this first data set. Now I'm going to put a refresh onto it. So by scheduling a refresh, make sure I'm always getting the latest data. I like to set mine for before I come online in the morning so that my data is fresh and I know it's consistently updated a single time. You can also set your refresh to update multiple times a day or at the cadence that you need. I typically say at least daily though, to make sure that your teams are aware. I'm setting mine for 5:30 a.m. and I'll use this same time for all of my data sets. You can have different time granularity for each of your data sets. Again, this is all up to your discretion. Like we did with the Athena views, we're also going to create the same process for the other data sets. We're going to use the same data source, the cost_dashboard. You can also create a new data source, but you can also still use the same existing one. I like to use the same existing one, but there's no impact to the lab regardless of what decision you choose to use. We're now creating our next view, which is the S3 view, and doing that edit and preview data, changing it to Spice, and updating the payer and linked account IDs to integers. Now that I've successfully done this, I'm saving the data set and going to schedule a refresh just as I did with the summary view. I've now successfully scheduled a refresh for my S3 view. Time to create my next data set. Again, I'm going to use my existing data source rather than having to create a new Athena data source, but you can follow whatever method you prefer. Make sure to change the query mode to Spice and update the payer account ID and the linked account ID to integer again. Now I've successfully created the EC2 running cost data set, and I'm going to schedule a refresh on it. This is all a one-time setup, so you only need to do this to get the dashboard up and running. After this, it's all automated. So we've now successfully created the EC2 running cost data set and refresh. We have one more unique data set to create, and again, I'm going to use that existing cost dashboard data set. What you'll note is that there were 5 views we created, but only 4 data sets. You'll see right after we finish completing this data set what the last view is used for. Again, making sure to change it to Spice and changing my data type from string to integer. This is for those leading zeros. You're always welcome to add another field in the query to have string as your account IDs, but you do need it for integer to set up the lab. Now I'm going to add the refresh again. I keep it consistent at 5:30 a.m. our time or Pacific time so that it's always refreshed for when I get online in the morning. So now we've successfully created the 4 data sets, but we need to update the summary view to join it with that RISP mapping Athena view, the one that doesn't have its own unique data set. What we're doing here is getting the reserved instance and savings plan information to map to the summary view. This allows you to see all the identifying information about your reservations and commits. So we're going to add the data. And then next we need to update the join. We're going to select the 2 circles and change it from an inner join to a left join. We now need to add 2 additional join clauses. And now we'll add our join clauses in. The first is off the ARNs for your RIs and SPs. And so for each of the fields, make sure you're having the corresponding mapping field to it. Next is going to be off the payer account ID in the corresponding mapping field. Now we're going to apply this. Oh, and I forgot to mention the last field of the mapping field is that billing period. After this loads, you're almost done setting up your data sets. Now you need to make sure that you always change your account IDs to integer. So scroll down to find your payer account ID mapping field and update the data type to integer. Now, once you hit save, you've successfully created all of your data sets for QuickSight. Now we're going to move over to our notepad and the command line because everything else to set up the dashboard requires the CLI. I like to use Anaconda Prompt, but you can use whatever program of your choosing. The first thing we're going to do is to list the data sets. This is going to give us unique ARNs or identifiers for each of the data sets we just created. We'll need this when we create the template JSON later. So now that I've updated my information, I'm running the query now in the command line. And what you'll see outputted is a single example. This is a single example with my data removed for security purposes, but you'll see a similar one for all of your data sets. They'll be listed here with the dataset ID and also the name. Make sure to note the name in this note sheet right here so that you can reference it later. Here's an example of all of my dataset ARNs and the corresponding name next to it. Now that we have all of our dataset ARNs, we're ready to get the next piece of information, and that is your user ARN. To get your user ARN information, we're going to run a similar command. What you'll see is I have another field now added with user ARN. You'll want to make sure that you also add this in and call out where it's from. We now have almost all the information to create our template JSON. This is what's going to tell the template that you've requested earlier what to key off of so that you can create an out-of-the-box dashboard that then you own with your own data in it. So now I'm going to copy over the JSON, and you want to save this somewhere where you have access to. So for me, for this demo purpose, I actually just saved it to my desktop so that I can easily navigate to it in the CLI. So now I've copied this over from the lab and pasted it into my notes. I've updated the account ID with my account ID information. I've updated the principal with the user ARN that I collected from the list user step. And now what I need to do is update the data sets with my specific data set ARN based on what I found in the list data sets. See how each of the templates has its own data set, how each of the templates have their own data set placeholder ID? You need to make sure that you put the right data set ARN with the corresponding identifier. If you accidentally if you accidentally forget to add the names, I recommend you go back into the command results and get the names for the correct data sets, because this can cause the lab to fail to create the dashboard. And then you'll need to go into the troubleshooting steps. So now that I've been able to see all this information, update the template, I'm now able to run the create dashboard command. So again, I'm going to copy this create dashboard command like I've done with the other commands into my notepad and update it with my information. This gives me something to reference, but also keeps it somewhere I can easily update my information. So now I'm running this, and I should see a 202. Perfect. This means I've successfully created the dashboard. You want to then check in the console, so go navigate back to QuickSight to make sure it's created. If it's not created, you'll want to follow steps 7 here to troubleshoot. I can see my dashboard, which means I've successfully created the cost intelligence dashboard. Now there's just one final step to make sure that this dashboard is yours to customize and own. We're going to open the dashboard, and we're going to update the permissions to allow you as the creator to save the dashboard. So what you need to do is go to Share and then Manage Dashboard Access and select Save As for your user. You can hit Confirm. You're the one who created these data sets as well. So now that I've successfully created and allowed myself to save, I can now save this as an analysis. What this allows me to now do is analysis is where you edit your dashboard. This is kind of like your working document. So you always want to work off your analysis and then publish it out as a dashboard. This analysis is where you can customize anything. So now what I've done is taken a template and given myself a customizable dashboard and analysis that I now own. You've now successfully created your cost intelligence dashboard and enabled it to be saved as an analysis, so you have your very own customizable cost intelligence dashboard. As a next step, you can continue on with the lab to update the mapping tables or create the data transfer dashboard. Reminder, if you're doing this just as tests, to break down all of your work so you don't continue to have the dashboard running if it's not in use. Please let us know if you have any questions or any feedback on the lab. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So this is Jill, and I'm just going to open up with a couple of comments. The intent that we have today is to help you get the lab completed successfully with our help. We know what we've just done is a very, very fast activity where we gave you an overview of what all is happening. So I'd love to invite folks to begin working at your own pace to go through the steps in the lab, knowing that we are here with the question and answer area of the webinar to answer your questions as they arise. I'm going to mute myself for a moment and pass it back over to Allie and give us a moment, and we will go through probably for any questions that apply to all, we'll open the mic and read out the question and do our best to respond to those questions as they arise. Please make sure that when you're posting your question, we know that things related to your cost and usage report can get to be sensitive. So make sure that when you're posting questions that they don't include any private information. You also can make a question to us, I think, directly just to the organizers. But yeah, I'm gonna hand it back over to Allie. Give me just a moment.
Perfect. Thanks, Jill. And thank you everyone for watching the video. We do know that it was fast, but we wanted to make sure that we save majority of this call for you to be hands-on and follow along to the steps in the lab and ask any questions that you have. So we see some of the questions being posted in the chat, and so we'll start getting back to those. In the meantime, please continue to use the chat and ask any questions as you're going through the lab. So we just had a question in the chat about time frames. And so by default, the lab is set to be trailing 7 months. And you are able to customize that to whatever you so please. The reason we do 7 months is it allows you to take advantage of the different functionalities and insights in QuickSight. But if you want to extend it longer to 12 months per se or less, you can also adjust it using the where statement in the queries. And then in any of the views as well within the visuals, so in the dashboard, you can actually go in and click on the visual and then click on filter, and you'll be able to adjust the time period using that billing period field.
Allie, to build more on that question, is there any impact on the dashboard if you include more than 7 months, or do you find that it still runs the same speed even with more data in there?
So we found it runs about the same speed. I think one of the key factors to increasing your data size is the number of linked accounts you have. That's when you really see it significantly grow. And we've had customers using this with thousands of accounts, and they're able to do 12 months of data with no issue. I'd say we don't see folks going typically don't see folks going beyond the trailing 12 months just because the granularity of needing it at a daily level beyond 12 months isn't as important to folks. But sometimes folks do create an additional view to create a historical just year-over-year summary where they can bring in even more data sets, but just at an annual or monthly level so that they can use it for their forecasting year-over-year and annual planning.
Awesome, that's helpful, thank you.
Question coming in, so I'll read them aloud as well. And this is actually just more of a comment that someone has made as well in the comments in the chat. One thing to note is that when you refresh so when you went through the lab, what you did was create a refresh on the data sets in QuickSight. In the example, I have mine set for 5:30 in the morning, so it's before I start work in the morning. If you are creating your Athena Views, and during this call, you've adjusted the time frame from, say, 7 months to 12 months, and you have your refresh set for the morning, you'll want to do a manual refresh on it right now by clicking on the data set and doing a refresh now. That will make sure that it populates with the latest information, because if not, it will take until your next scheduled refresh to bring it into QuickSight.
Hey, Allie, question coming in. What do you see as some of the first things people will customize or change once they build the dashboard?
Great question. So a couple of things that we see folks doing immediately is first adding in that mapping table so they can group data by what they need to see, whether it be their leaders, whether it be by their business units. And one of the main things that we recommend and what we see customers doing with that information is creating controls. And an example of what a control is on the Optics Explorer page. And what you're able to see in that control is that you can filter the whole entire sheet. You can also add a filter for your control on all of the sheets. So say you wanted to go in and just look at one business unit, you could toggle and see that across the board. Another thing that we really think is important and we recommend you doing is selecting what cost values you want to use. What you'll see in the cost intelligence dashboard is the billing summary has two different types of cost. You have your invoiced cost, which is also known as unblended, and then you have your amortized cost. And your amortized cost takes any reserve instance or savings plan with those upfront fees and amortizes them across the billing period and also shows where they were applied rather than where they were purchased. Some teams like to see it in their unblended costs for all data points, and the dashboard by default is set up to pull in your amortized cost. If you want to adjust that, what you'll want to do is edit the cost calculated field and change it from cost underscore amortized to cost underscore unblended. This gives you the flexibility to update the cost value without having to make changes to every single visual. And there's a couple questions coming in on troubleshooting, so I'll answer those over the chat, but it's really helpful if you, when you're adding your questions in, let me know what view you're using. If it's the one with RIs and SPs, no savings plans, no reserve instances, and that specific view so that we can make sure we are able to help you as quickly as possible.
And we did get a question, just is this the right place to ask questions about the lab? And the answer is yes, but I would also flag that I will put another link in the chat window that just gives a direct link in the upper right corner of your QuickSight homepage. There's a button that says community, and when you click there, that's just a helpful link to our user community, where we also address questions from time to time, both from other users of QuickSight, and then our product team periodically checks in. Because of the work that we're doing today, you'll see a lot more posts being answered directly this afternoon, for example, with follow-up questions that relate to QuickSight. But I would flag that within the Q&A here is a good place for questions on the logistics, the lab, the process that you're going through, but we will not be sharing out the questions. You won't have access to the questions after the fact. So the answer community that I just posted into the link and shared with everyone is a good place for those kind of general QuickSight questions that you might want to come back to.
So there was a great question that just came in around the different fields within the curve. So the summary view is just a getting started query that should cover, a lot of your views that you'd want to make some basic cost analysis with, but you can expand on that view directly. I don't recommend adding resource IDs into it because it will get very, very long, but you can add additional fields into it if you're interested in adding, for example, if you want an information about a certain product field, if you want to add in additional tags as well. How you go about doing and adding any of these fields is, I like to say, above any of your calculated fields. So anything that's a count or a sum, you can add it directly above that. And then just make sure to always add a group by at the bottom, because you're adding another non-grouped field. So meaning it's not summing or calculating anything. And so you'll want to add one of those, but you can expand it to be as many more fields as you'd want. I just don't recommend removing. You can also add additional views into the dashboard. So for example, in the well-architected labs, you'll notice a module on a data transfer dashboard. You can actually add that data transfer query in as another data set into your QuickSight into your cost intelligence dashboard if you want to have that there. So this is just as the getting started point. but you can also
Allie, can you give me an example of why I might want resource IDs if it makes it a lot longer, but why might I want that visibility?
Yeah, definitely. And so resource IDs have an amazing purpose, which is why the lab is built with a CUR that requires those resource IDs into it, because a resource ID is what's going to allow you to take it to the actual level that you can take action on. So what do you need to know and what do you need to tell your team? The reason you don't pull them in for everything is because there is countless resource IDs that it will make your reports go very slow, and it will also add additional lags into your reporting. But when you would want them, for example, in the S3 view, you'll notice that we bring resource IDs in. The resource IDs for S3, for example, are showing the bucket name for when you're looking at your S3 storage. So what you're able to see is additional level of granularity and insight to see, for example, what S3 bucket is causing the largest increase in your spend, or what S3 bucket has the highest growth rate. This gives you a way to group your data and go a level deeper in granularity. One thing I really like to challenge everyone to do too is, the CUR is just a getting started data set. So once you're comfortable with this, bring in additional data sets. We have customers who bring in Trusted Advisor, some of their CloudWatch information. So what they're able to do is take even just the cost and usage data and add another level of granularity into it so that they can really give their teams actionable insights.
If you brought in that data, Allie, would you join it in Athena, or how would you merge it with your CUR data?
So it depends on what data set you're bringing in. I typically would say keeping your data sets as is in the cost intelligence dashboard and creating new ones. This gives you the ability, because with those additional data sets, you want to go down to a resource ID level. And so you'd want to have a very, very specific query or a specific use case to bring in. How I like to kind of start with it is, what is the question you're trying to answer? So say, for example, you want to know what your cost of your EBS volumes that were showing as underutilized in Trusted Advisor was, or another use case like that. You're able then to work backwards and say, okay, I know I want to just look at EBS. I know then from the CUR, I only want to bring in my EBS usage as well as my EBS resource IDs. You've now taken that very, very, very large grouping of resource IDs and limited it down into something actionable. So creating little views off of it, similar to how you see with the S3 view or the data transfer view, and adding in those metrics. We also see folks adding in their Aws Organizations Data. And to do that, one of the things that we've seen help customers out is to actually add another field into the summary view as well as the other views that brings in your linked account ID, but you keep it as a linked account ID as a string. So it's a second linked account ID, so you bring it as a string into the dashboard. This gives you the flexibility to use the mapping to the organization data, but still allows your teams to use any mapping tables that they're using with the integers. The reason for that is we keep the account IDs as integers by default in the dashboard to help get around any of the leading zeros. Leading zeros, we've known, is one of the largest areas we've seen of cost discrepancies or issues presenting in the data. And so that's why we want to keep it as an integer in QuickSight, but you can also add additional fields there. I'd say one thing to think about is when you're going through and asking your teams, ask them what data sets or data sources they use today and are the most meaningful for them. Because what you're able to do is start to prioritize the use cases that you want to bring in. There was another question about look-back periods. One thing on look-back periods is all of the different data sets have varying levels of granularity. The summary view goes back the furthest because it is the most comprehensive and kind of your 95% use case data set, we'll call it. The other views also have where statements, where it's talking about the amount of data they're bringing back. You can expand that to be further than you want it to be, than it is by default, or adjust that to the granularity of your choosing. Each of them are updated on their own, so you want to make sure you update all of them. One other just kind of use case that we've seen become very popular right now is around savings plans and how you can look at savings plan information within your dashboard. We actually have some folks who are saying for forecasting purposes, it's helpful for their teams to be able to see, for example, rather than the amortized cost or the cost unblended, they want to look at what the on-demand cost equivalent would have been if for the reserved instances and savings plans. What you can actually do is within the summary view query or the query of your choosing is adjust the data set to look at the pricing underscore public on-demand cost. This will allow you to change it from that effective cost value to the public cost. That's a use case that we've seen as a growing popularity. And there's also additional information on how you can look at your savings plans using the savings plan or pricing model analysis lab. A couple other kind of key areas where we've seen a lot of questions come in on is where, how do you go about scaling your dashboards out? And one of the things that we like to say is, how is your teams organized? Are you going to do a central strategy where you are going to share your dashboard across your organization and all the teams are able to see their data within it or see a presented view of the dashboard? Or we have certain customers who they are running very decentralized and they actually give the cost and usage report data for those specific accounts based on their business units to each of the business units. And the business units have their own dashboard that they own and manage. Either of them are great options. It's just wanting to make sure of what aligns best with your organization. So we had another question come in about different fields within the curve. I personally like to always see it for myself with my data. I think it's really helpful to be able to understand what's there in terms of my organization. So what I like to do is in addition to using the resources on the data dictionary, which is in the README or the FAQ of the dashboard lab setup, it directs you to the cost and usage report data dictionary. In addition to that, what I like to do is do a select star, which is going to say, I want to see all of my data from your cost and usage report and limit it to say either 1 day or 1 hour or even just 100 line items. What you're then able to see is a subset of the data and what is all available for it. I personally like to do 1 day. And the reason for that is what you can actually see is all of the different products and services and what fields are available for them so that you can kind of start to say, what is the use case that I'm interested in and what is the data that is available to me? And it helps start to add in additional fields that you'd want to bring into the curve, but also lets you see fields that might not be mandatory across and are dynamic so they're not showing up for all of your different data sets. And so you're now aware of them and how to use them.
Hey, Allie, I have a question for you. I see on the compute and the storage tabs how you highlight the unit cost. Could you explain to me a little bit why you think that's important and why that's something I need to pay attention to?
Yeah, definitely. So unit cost is something that we like to look at because it gives you an ability to drill down and see kind of a more consistent metric across all of your teams. So for example, while your EC2 cost month over month might be growing because you've maybe migrated a workload over or you've ramped up for a product launch of some sort, your growth rate will show as growing. But what you're able to use your unit cost for, and let's take EC2 as an example, is your EC2 unit cost. By the way that AWS works, we're always looking to make sure you're only paying for what you need. And so your unit cost should be staying constant or decreasing. And one way to look at how that's influenced is in the compute summary view. What you're able to see is your unit cost by pricing model. And so now looking at your unit cost by pricing model, you'll notice that there's varying unit costs for your on-demand, reserved, savings plans, or spot. And the overall unit cost is impacted by what your coverage is by this. So what we like to look at is how does, say, purchasing a savings plan positively impact my unit cost? How does an expiring savings plan impact my unit cost? And it gives you a way to normalize the data across all of your different business units. Another question came in about wanting to know about the difference between product code or service. So the reason that we add service in is service is a calculated field, which you'll see in the summary view query. The reason for this is mainly for data transfer. Let's think about our data transfer and how it looks in the product code field. In the product code field, you have your data transfer under the service that it's relating to. So it can be EC2, it can be S3, it can be a variety of products. But the service code actually will identify it as data transfer. So by adding that service field in, you're able to group your data transfer costs together and still see the product that's relating to. So that's why we have service code in there today and the adjustments there. We also had another question come in about budgets. So we have a lot of folks who actually will overlay with their mapping tables a budget. And you can create some really great insights in there by having a table that will actually show how you're trending month over month against your budget that you have at the level that you need to have for granularity. We have a customer who actually does it on based off a tag and also based off of their account mapping. And by doing that, what they're able to do is say a month over month budget and how they're trending against it, as well as their year-to-date budget summary, whether it be they're trending above it, they're trending below it with how much is remaining. There's a ton of different features within QuickSight to add colors to it, to highlight and populate, who's over budget by X percentage. And so it's really great to be able to use the data together to quickly see what's going on in terms of your business.
Allie, say I want to share this with my finance partner, but I don't want them to mess anything up in the dashboard. Is there a way to send a link or something like that to where I can show someone a view I'm seeing, but not give them the opportunity to mess with some of the customizations?
Yeah, definitely. And so how you can kind of think about your analysis versus your dashboard. Your analysis is your working document. Folks who have access to the analysis should be the ones that if they make a change, it's not going to be an issue across your organization. Your analysis is where you're going to add and adjust and present the data that you need to see. But when teams actually go to use it, what they're going to want to do is publish that dashboard out and give access to the published dashboard, not the analysis. The reason for that is the dashboard, you can't actually create any changes that cause the analysis to change. It's just allowing you to essentially use the analysis in only a read-only mode, essentially. So they can still filter. You can control what filters they have access to. You can control what level of granularity they have if you want to look at, for example, some of the security features behind it. And say, for example, now there's a team member that maybe doesn't need access to it. What you can actually do is set up an email report for them. And so you can have it set up to email them a sheet of the dashboard, for example, for that finance person who maybe only needs to see the billing summary or the cost summary, so that they can just get a quick email with what's happening and they don't actually have to go into the tool itself. So we had a question come in as a follow-up on the budgets. Today, we don't have a lab that walks you through connecting to the AWS budgets. That's something that we'd love to get some of your feedback on of what you'd like to see next. It helps us prioritize different modules or different enhancements that we want to bring to you in a specific order. How budgets are used today and how we see customers using it is they're either using their own process to get the budget information there or adding it to their mapping document. We have customers who pull in from the API other information as well. So it is possible to get these informations from other data sets within AWS, but we don't have any labs on it today. And we had a question about if this recording is going to be made available. Jill, I believe you're going to be posting it to the QuickSight website.
Yes, so we will email it to all attendees, and we will also be posting it to our QuickSight YouTube channel. And I'll put a link to the QuickSight YouTube channel in the chat window as well.
So we had another question come in around savings plans analysis because they were looking at the savings plan analysis lab. This is actually a big topic as folks are coming up on, say, expiration of savings plans and want to look at some modeling of what it would have been, say, rather than if they'd had the 1-year savings plan, if they had a 3-year. And so going back to that pricing analysis lab, you can actually bring in the savings plan price list into Athena and actually use a mapping to map it against your existing savings plans to say, okay, here's what it is today. Here's what it would have been if I had this as a 3-year no upfront savings plan. And the reason that you're able to do this is the product underscore SKU field. It maps to the discounted SKU in the savings plan price list. So that's been a big one to look at across the board for repurchasing and planning for their, say, 2021 planning on budget asks to their leadership.
Allie, if I hadn't made a savings plan purchase before, but I was interested in doing so, how would you suggest I look at some of the views in this to help me make that decision?
Definitely. So there's one view because of savings plan and how they're able to be applied. So the compute savings plan is what I like to call the blanket coverage. It is one of my favorite pricing models because it can apply to any eligible on-demand usage across your EC2 instances, your Fargate usage, as well as Lambda. And so there's a lot of flexibility with it to allow your teams to optimize while you doing more of a consolidated purchasing. So what that also allows us to do is within the dashboard to use the insights from the cost and usage data to look at your hourly spend for your compute savings plan eligible spend. So how I would go about doing this is we have a great recommendations tool on Cost Explorer that allows you to dive deeper into your recommendations and see some of that information on it. But how I like to think about it is no matter what you're looking at, you always want to look at your on-demand hourly spend of what you're looking to convert over. The reason for that is when you look at your average hourly on-demand spend hour over hour, you're able to see your peaks and your troughs. How you can use that within the dashboard is say over the past X time period you're looking at, you can say my on-demand hourly eligible spend, so that's that on-demand compute savings plan eligible spend field in the RISP summary, never drop below this amount. We know that there's, we want to have some buffer room for optimizations in other areas. So let's drop this a little bit lower and maybe take 75% of that. So say you had, $100 of our average hourly on-demand spend, and you wanted to drop it to that $75 mark. You now have a metric that you can take over to your recommendations in Cost Explorer. And by using the cost equivalent, the on-demand cost equivalent, you're able to see what that looks like in actual terms of your data. So how I've seen customers use it and how we've helped customers kind of make these views to show their leadership to get buy-in is using the dashboard view here and adding their on-demand cost equivalent of their recommended purchase of what they want to do based on what they found in Cost Explorer, and actually overlaying it in as a line that's showing where they fall with that hourly on-demand cost equivalent. What it gives their leadership the ability to see is that they are well within that, and it's something that now they can see the savings. And so it really visualizes and quantifies what you're able to see from those recommendations. Another feature that we really say is important is thinking ahead of time, because savings plans and reserve instances are not a one-time purchase. You are always changing and growing or shifting based on what's going on in your businesses. And so what we recommend is setting a coverage level that you're looking for. I personally like to use on-demand coverage rather than, say, a savings plan coverage level or a reserved instance coverage level. The reason for that is it allows you to use the other pricing models that also have added benefits. So for example, if you use a savings plan, you want to have a savings plan coverage of 75%. That's a little bit hard to follow and track along to, because what if your teams now adopt spot and have really increased their spot usage? A 75% savings plan coverage might not be the right direction for your team. You might want to drop it a little bit lower. And so what we see folks using with a little bit more success is that on-demand coverage level. So saying, I never want my on-demand coverage to get below 20% or above 20%. And what you're then able to do is adjust your savings plans or your reserved instances to fill in the gaps. And we recommend doing that on a cadence, whether it be quarterly or twice a year. But that just allows you to make sure that you're always increasing your coverage or adjusting it to align with your goals.
So Allie, you mentioned Spot in there. Is there a way in this dashboard to see what I'm doing on Spot or any of my improvements on Spot?
So you can use the compute summary to get a quick glance at your spot usage. One thing that you'll see is that we have an estimated spot savings. So this is looking at your average unit cost, because what you'll notice in the CUR is that there's not a public pricing for spot today. And so you'll want to make sure that you're using just that average unit cost. But we wanted to give you a metric to show what you're saving, because we see spot as typically the largest savings opportunity as a percentage over on demand than any of our other pricing models. It also encourages best behavior because you're only using it when you need it then. And so what you're able to do is to look at your spot. You can actually drill down into the dashboard. Say, for example, if you use your EC2 compute cost view, which is in the compute summary tab, you can actually click on spot. And when you click on that spot filter, which is right under the header EC2 compute cost, in that second row on the right-hand side, that chart, what you can do is say focus only on spot. What you can do after you focus only on spot is change it to see it by, say, your business unit, by your linked account, by the different groupings that you need to see, so you can see how your spot usage is changing month over month. What you can also do is the Optics Explorer is a great way to model out use cases. So for example, you want to look at a specific use case for one of your teams. You can go in there and model out with any of the different filters there and say, okay, I want to look at my spot usage by what type of instances we're using, or what type of operating system, or where in the regions, where in the world it's falling, so your region or your availability zone. You're able to do that within the Optics Explorer. So we had another question come in about the reserved instance and savings plan summary view. It's about why we're showing usage savings or utilized commit rather than your whole reservation. The reason for that is what we're trying to show is the gross savings that you had. So your usage savings is the reservation or the commit that was applied. So it doesn't include any of that unused portion. Why we show that from expiring is because it's going to show your actual savings for what was used that it's expiring, say, next month or this month. The utilized commit field is very, very, very helpful and when you're looking to repurchase. So when you look at that utilized commit rather than your total commit, you're able to see, okay, what was actually used across my organization that is going to be expiring this month. You can then use that to adjust your repurchase to make sure, for example, say you purchased RDSRI, that is no longer in use across your organization because of a business shift. They're using a different type of database instance now. You probably don't want to repurchase that exact commit. And so it will only show you what has actually been utilized. And so using that, if you see a number there in the reserved instance and savings plan summary, you'll want to then see if it's expiring this month, you want to go over to the expiring RI and SP tracker and actually see what is happening. So for example, at the top of it, you can select your expiration month. And so if you know it's expiring this month, you can click on that. And what it will show you is the actual reservations that are expiring. What it shows here is the type, the terms, the date, and then also that unique identifier, that ARN. That ARN is really going to help you tell your teams, hey, this reservation or this unique ARN is expiring. What is your guys' plan? And the data and the cost data on the reserved instance and savings plan tracker is actually showing your previous month summary on it. So what was your gross savings? What was your net savings? What was your unused cost? And it allows them to understand, okay, how do I want it to proceed? Do I want to repurchase? Do I want to maybe purchase a savings plan rather than an EC2 convertible reserved instance? It lets them see what's happening and so that they can proactively take action. One thing to call out here is that unused cost isn't always a negative. So you'll see sometimes about utilization. I prefer to call it unused cost because at the end of the day, there's a break-even point. And as long as you're coming out ahead and having a savings, the unused cost is something that you want to track to make sure you're taking action where possible and make sure you're making the best decisions. But it's not something that you want to, that necessarily means it was a bad purchase. It's just something that shows you how you're using it. And so, for example, what I like to do is what is the cost? What is my unused cost? And what is my overall percent savings? So that includes your unused portion and your used portion, and what is that overall savings? It helps you get an idea of what your actual usage levels are, but also keeps the unused cost in more of a positive connotation of how you can think about it. I noticed another question in the chat about a potential course on cost management using CUR in the QuickSight. That's actually something that I personally, as a customer, would have loved to have as well too. And so as we're thinking about different modules and how we can better enable you to create your own actionable insights, one thing that we've thought about bringing in, and so we'd love to get your feedback again to make sure we prioritize the right modules for the next well-architected lab, is a kind of how-to guide for using the CUR in QuickSight in terms of the questions we ask. So for example, when we made this dashboard, what we went through is, what are the questions we want to answer and how can we use the CUR to do it? And so what we were thinking as a potential, follow on, and this is where we definitely need your feedback, is having kind of an overview or a well-architected view on the cost and usage report. And, some of the fields that we think you could pull in for different analyses. So how we go about checking if you wanted to look at a specific use case, some of the ways we approach thinking about the CUR and thinking about how to bring it into QuickSight to visualize it. So that's something that we were thinking about as well, because that then puts the toolkit into your hands so that you can now enhance this dashboard and have the whole CUR at your disposal with a little bit of added insight.
We're kind of at the beginning of this new capability, and I know the folks here on the line have been asking great questions today. I'm really happy that we did this particular session because we were able to get so many people together to really dive into executing the workshop itself in the lab and getting questions answered simultaneously, and hearing from those of you who have been so deeply involved in creating it and answering questions has been super helpful. I know that we're getting close to our proposed end time, so I'm just going to call out again that we have been recording today. We will email out a slightly edited version, just making sure that we have a clean tape, and we'll remove some of the pauses and things. I hope that all have found value in spending time together here today. I'm just posting in the chat window our schedule of upcoming events. We will be doing this session again in a few weeks, specifically on November 4th. We'll be doing something very similar. So if you have some colleagues that you think would benefit from this, or you just want to come back and ask us some specific questions, we'd be happy to have you again. Wondering, Ali, if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the group. I know that we'll be taking questions as well, like I mentioned, in the QuickSight community throughout the day, but would love to just hear any final comments that you might have to share.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you all for joining. Again, I know this one was more of a hands-on, creating the dashboard yourself. We wanted to make sure that this was the first of the well-architected QuickSight hands-on labs, so that you can all have that foundation, have your dashboard. What I'm showing here is just a brief recap of what you're able to get out of that first cost intelligence dashboard, which is a billing summary with your forecast, being able to gain actionable insight into your usage spend trends and anomalies, deep diving into your compute cost and usage, breaking down your storage spend to identify spend drivers, as well as seeing your coverage across the different storage types, seeing a consolidated view of your reserved instances and savings plans, and going back to that coverage level, thinking about some of the metrics that are important to you, being able to track your reserved instance and savings plans commits so you can proactively think about how you want to manage your reservations. And finally, you can explore and model different cost and usage scenarios using that Optics Explorer. So this whole lab was made to get you going with it. And again, as Jill mentioned, there's another session coming up in November where we're going to talk about, now that you have it enabled, let's talk about customizing it. Let's talk about these different use cases to make it even more value add for you and your organization. One of the key things that we think is important is, while the dashboard is a great foundation, making sure you customize it to show what you need to see and how your teams need to see it, so that it is something that you can use across all of your different use cases and continue to build on it. So we thank you so much for joining, and we appreciate any feedback you have on the cost intelligence dashboard, as well as what you'd like to see within the next module. So Jill, where do I press play for the video?
Should be able to click on sharing and show, and then have a little drop down button there. And just let me know if you need help. Happy to.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone.
Great. And with that, we'll just wish everyone to have a great rest of the day, and look for our follow-up email with a link to the recording that'll be posted into our QuickSight YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone.